Hey guys, and welcome to CANNAMAntv. My name is Connor McLeod, and in this episode, I speak with author, cannabis writer, and podcaster Mary Biles. In this episode, we discuss what led Mary to become a cannabis writer and podcaster, Mary's ayahuasca experience, CBD and novel foods, Project CBD, differences between American and UK perspectives on cannabis, and Mary's method whilst writing her first book, the CBD Book, The Essential Guide to CBD Oil. Make sure to like and subscribe, and join us on Patreon, where you can help to build a stronger cannabis media platform. Now then, let's talk cannabis. Thank you very much for coming on the channel.
Yeah, no worries. Yeah, my pleasure. Yeah, good to be here.
Obviously, many people in the industry will be familiar with your work anyway, but for those that have that are just coming to you for the first time, could you give a background on yourself and how you became active in the cannabis industry?
Yeah, it's quite random, really. My background, I used to work in TV for many years in the UK. So for about sort of 15 years, I worked in TV production, in documentaries. Then I had a complete career break and retrained as a complementary therapist. So within that, I had to kind of study the body, anatomy and physiology, that kind of stuff. And also just had a kind of an idea about holistic health, really, and you know how that didn't really kind of align with the pharmaceutical model. But then I had another complete kind of career change. I ended up living in Spain, in southern Spain, in Andalusia, in Seville, where I was teaching English, which again, quite sort of a random departure. But it was during this time that I started writing, basically. I kind of had lost touch on my creative side, and I started writing a blog about Seville. And then I kind of started writing other stuff that was about plant medicine. In Andalusia, there's quite an active ayahuasca scene. So I was sort of dipped my toe in, you know, the kind of psychedelic waters over there. And it was, you know, quite, well, it is very transformative. You know, you kind of get these tremendous learnings about yourself, about consciousness, about the interconnectedness of life and everything. And I truly believe that if it wasn't for those experiences with ayahuasca, I wouldn't be on this path with cannabis right now. So really, it was a kind of chain of events, really. I'd just been writing about plant medicine, about ayahuasca. During that time, a friend's mum had pancreatic cancer. She was living in Belgium. And, you know, as often is the case, she was dying at this point. She'd had all different treatments, you know, chemo, radiotherapy, and she was, you know, suffering terribly. You know, pancreatic cancer in particular it's a horrible, horrible form of cancer, very, very painful. But with her, the morphine wasn't working. You know, it wasn't actually managing the pain. It left her terribly confused. She had no quality of life. And her children, her adult children, just kind of, you know, asked the doctor, the GP, was there any chance of trying cannabis, basically? And they would, you know, they managed to find some kind of loophole that the doctor could prescribe a cannabis oil because it's in the best interest of the patients or something like that anyway. And it just allowed her to you know, spend those last few weeks in, you know, with the minimal amount of suffering. She was completely lucid right up until just before her death. She wasn't, you know, I'm sure she probably had some pain, but it was nothing compared to what she had before. She had a little bit of appetite. She was a little bit stoned. So she, you know, she just kind of, you know, she had quality of life and dignity more than anything. And I've always felt, I don't know, we all leave this mortal coil at some point. And if we can do it, you know, with the least amount of suffering and with dignity, I think that's incredibly important. And so it just really kind of struck a chord. I mean, at that point, you know, at university and after I'd smoked the odd spliff, and but I had a small inkling about the medicinal benefits. An ex-boyfriend, I remember him sort of showing me the Rick Simpson video, and so I had a kind of idea that there were these different chemicals or, you know, compounds within the cannabis plant, but really nothing at all. But it was this moment with my friend's mum when it was like, I don't know, I felt compelled. I had no choice but to do something. And then everything just kind of lined up, you know. It was really bizarre in a way. Just a couple of weeks later, there was a hemp fair in Seville where I was living. I got a press pass, just sort of, you know, wobbled along and was there sort of, you know, talking to different companies that were exhibiting. They were just, at that point, this was 2016, I think, and there were just 2 CBD companies, one of which was a company called Endoca, who a Danish company. They've been in the CBD industry kind of from since the beginning, really. And I got chatting to the mum and of the CEO who was there, and we kind of got on, and she found out that I was a writer. They were looking for a writer. A week later, I had an interview with the head of marketing, and a few days after that, I was working full time in the CBD industry. So it just, that's how it happened, really. And so my kind of first experience was very much about CBD and CBD oil, and but because this was the kind of early days, and companies weren't so kind of slick, and they didn't really understand digital marketing at that point, I just had free reign to write whatever I wanted to write about. So I was just sort of interviewing scientists, writing about the endocannabinoid system. It wasn't the kind of boring dirge that you see most CBD companies producing these days, mostly because they're not allowed to write anything of any interest. So that was it. And then I kind of, segued out of the CBD industry, because, as you know yourself, it's not just about CBD. CBD is one part. And actually, I'm sure we'll touch on this later, I think calling the products that, until now have been widely available, CBD oil is actually a bit of a misnomer. I think they're hemp extracts. So, which, I think that's a better description of what they are, because they can contain not just CBD. But so with all this, it kind of, I suppose it feels like I've found my calling, really. It's I feel incredibly passionate, as I say, compelled just to kind of try and get better access, but also to defend the plant, really. I think that perhaps comes from my sort of plant medicine, ayahuasca sort of introduction. It's like, I think we have to defend this plant, because it has so much potential, and it has such an amazing message to tell us all if we actually just listen to it.
I'm glad that you mentioned ayahuasca again there, because when you first mentioned that, I mean, it's not in my list of things to talk about here, but please, you have to indulge me. What was your experience with that? And prior to going into your experience with ayahuasca, excuse me, one of the things I find fascinating about this in particular is that the metaphysical element that's engaged with these psychedelic substances. So that there is very much a gap that is bridged with these substances between consciousness and the metaphorical realm. And that's one of the things. There's a book that I've read called I think it's A Cosmic Serpent and Origins of Knowledge, and the man, I think it's Jeremy Narby, an anthropologist, and he touches on. He essentially attempts to touch on the physiological basis of why physiologically we would experience such symbolic consistencies with these experiences. And one of the things he mentioned, which would be interesting if it was also included in your experience, was the coiling of a serpent, of a snake type thing. And he associated that with the double helix, and which essentially, to completely butcher the man's work, he essentially says that the experience which we're experiencing is the breakdown of the default mode network. So you're actually experiencing the cellular processes on the most intimate basis, essentially, and then the mind can only comprehend this in a metaphorical sense. So, and that's what he essentially generalizes it. So yeah. So I mean, what was your experience of ayahuasca, and what was your conceptions before going into it?
I mean, my conceptions were a tremendous amount of fear and respect, because you're kind of worried you're going to lose your shit, really. Which it's like, because in all honesty, for me, my reasons for trying it was kind of I mean, I've for quite a few years I've had sort of varying levels of anxiety and just sort of, I think humans, we do have quite a lot of internal suffering, which comes from, my childhood was no worse than anybody else's, but you kind of left with these sort of internal scars, really, which manifest, I think, in different ways. So I kind of, actually there was the same ex-boyfriend who sort of showed me the Rick Simpson video. I mean, he'd had various addictions during his life, and it was actually ayahuasca that finally, ironically, actually, he sort of, there's different addictions of being, kind of cocaine, alcohol, and various things. But actually, when he stopped those, he transferred his addiction to cannabis, ironically. Here we are all kind of, proclaiming the the joys of cannabis. But, for him, he had a tremendous dependency on it. He was a dentist. And, first thing in the morning, he'd, have a smoke, and he'd be smoking throughout the day in between patients, etc. That's not ideal if you're a patient, but if you're a dentist. So, through ayahuasca, and I kind of remember the dialogue he had with his grandparents, actually, because what happens, you often dialogue with the plant, or it's not just one plant, but the kind of spirit of ayahuasca. Or, you can have kind of visitations or conversations with, parts of yourself, or, sort of members of your family that have passed away, or, entities or anything really. So, when I came into it, I knew that I just needed to understand what was happening with this anxiety and where it's coming from and that kind of stuff. So my experiences, it was, the thing is with those kind of experiences, I think it's quite boring for other people when you kind of go, and this happens and that happened, but it was.
I guarantee, Mary, I absolutely guarantee the viewers will be sitting on the edge of their seat waiting for this.
No, the first time I did, thankfully, because it was a Peruvian shaman who came over, and it was 3 nights in a row, and it was really quite hardcore. But the first night, thankfully, it was a joyous, blissful experience. And actually what I learned was all the worries, everything that I thought was so terribly important and got anxious of, was I could just sort of, every time something came up, I could just laugh and see just, the ridiculousness of it all. While at the same time, I just generally had a joyful, blissful, wonderful experience. But then the next night, I think it was some kind of death of the ego, and it was absolutely horrendous. I felt like there was kind of like drills going into my head. And I say, every time you kind of do it, it's. When you're talking about actually that kind of cellular level, I remember one time actually, you do feel like your whole body is being scanned. Often that feels like that can happen. And I remember one time, like I could feel, I had sort of mercury fillings in my teeth, and I could feel like the energy, the plant or whatever was just kind of scanning my teeth, and just sort of, it just would stop every time there's a filling. And there was this weird sensation of, so actually then I got my fillings removed after that. But I don't know, it's really, I don't know, I can't do it justice really. But you do go through sort of paradigm shifts, and it doesn't always, afterwards you come out and you feel like nothing is ever going to be the same, and you have, those kind of peak experiences. You kind of, you end up kind of grasping at them really, and they do say with ayahuasca, almost the most important thing is the integration afterwards, because you might have these tremendous insights about how changes you need to bring into your life, but then if you don't integrate those into your life, or sometimes it can bring up kind of past traumatic events, and that's when you do need some kind of perhaps some psychological support afterwards or something like that. But I guess for me it's overall it's like a kind of it's a peek behind the curtain really of illusion, so what I think and I think that's what's kind of changed in me is all these kind of, the man-made constructions that we have, and institutions that we, view as being kind of solid and fixed entities. They are constructions. And I think something that's been very interesting with COVID actually is that we've had a glimpse of how these constructions can just, with one thing, just kind of, taken away, can all fall apart actually. And what we thought was, our world that is this solid entity, non-changing, is very easily it can just kind of disintegrate actually. So I think that's really important, if you can have that experience of just a little peek behind the curtain, so you can see things more as they really are. So I think that's helpful, and that's why for me, I with cannabis, bringing back to cannabis, it is I still have this part of actually I have to be defending the plant, because I think it's got so much more to offer us than kind of synthesizing or coming up with a sort of pharmaceutical version of some cannabinoids. And it's like that's then taking it down to our reductionist human level again. And and that I sort of feel I have to kind of fight it, you know, through our kind of human lens. We have to sort of bring it down to quite a gross level, and yeah, I think we're kind of missing a trick when we do that.
I think as well, just when you're describing it, bring it down to that gross level, it's kind of hand in hand with, and there's by no means to disregard the scientific method, but it's kind of built into it to kind of disregard any form of sentimental human cultural element of the plant, because a sentimental relationship, albeit metaphysical or spiritual in intention, has no place in the scientific literature. It doesn't have any applicability, and largely a lot of these additional chemicals that's in and that's used in concert with the rest of the cannabinoids and fatty acids and terpenes. These are complementary, not just on a molecular level or a physiological level. It is very spiritual in intent, and even I think to describe it as a spiritual dynamic, a spiritual relationship is kind of crude. You know, it doesn't sound applicable, and yet it kind of it's all that's available, essentially, to describe it that way. But yeah, so I mean, in 2014, essentially, was when CBD really came on the market. But a lot of people think it just came, you know, appeared overnight. So I mean, could you give a wee general history of how it even came to be in 2014 that CBD became?
So it was discovered in 1940, I believe, by Roger Adams, a scientist. But it was really Raphael Mechoulam who kind of mapped out the molecule and then synthesized it in the 1960s. And then in 1980, he did the first study really of using it in patients with epilepsy, where it was shown to reduce seizures. Now, many people think then the next kind of significant moment was with Charlotte Figi, who was a little girl with Dravet syndrome in Colorado. But recently, I interviewed Martin Lee, who's the founder of Project CBD, who's, you know, I'm sure you're aware, is know, the sort of non-for-profit educational organization based out of California. So that I write for. That's kind of one of the main places that I write for still. But Martin basically is a really beautiful kind of missing link that he shared. So Martin is a journalist, you know, he's an award-winning journalist. Before he came to cannabis, he was sort of writing about completely unrelated things, like fascism. He's got a book on fascism, and actually he's written about psychedelics as well. But anyway, so he, back in, I think it was around kind of like 2011, he's started becoming fascinated with the science around cannabis and cannabinoids, etc. And so he started going to these kind of the first, I think it's the ICCRS kind of symposiums that were happening every year, where all these great scientific minds would come together and share their findings and research that they were doing. And this is, you know, well, it's not that long ago really, but everything's moved so quickly in the world of cannabis. But certainly it was, you know, it's before CBD had really come to the fore. And he kept hearing, you know, all these scientists talking about CBD, and it was, you know, preclinical research, but he was like, what is this CBD? You know, what? So he sort of went back to California, and, you know, was kind of speaking to growers and stuff like that. You know, did they have any strains that had CBD? Obviously everything at the time was, well, mostly everything was very high in THC. And I think actually even the testing at the time, they wouldn't have even been testing for CBD. But he did find, and this, you know, him and I think a kind of small group of other people, they did find some strains that did have some CBD in them, basically. So they kind of started growing some plants, and then they started kind of, I guess they created what was Project CBD. So I never really kind of thought about what it actually was, a project, you know, something which is lovely. So, and they started kind of giving away plants, basically. They're giving them away to growers, to dispensaries, to just people, patients, you know. And yeah, so it's sort of, you know, they started to, you know, kind of develop a bit of a buzz around CBD with the patients. You know, they found it helpful. It wasn't just, you know, there were maybe the kind of like that kind of Sativex 1-to-1 ratio, or it might have been a kind of CBD dominant plant. And I guess then perhaps they, you know, growers started, you know, kind of breeding, you know, sort of new varieties. But then apparently the guys whose their names have completely escaped me, the guys from Charlotte's Web, the brothers, what's the
Stanley Brothers? Is it Stanley
that's
Brothers?
them, the Stanley brothers.
I'm
Yeah,
so glad I got that. That would be an epic failure if I didn't get that.
Yeah, so the Stanley brothers, basically they kind of, from what was happening in California, because this wasn't, we kind of think of in the UK of, America, but obviously it's this huge country, and what's going on in the West Coast is different to the East Coast, etc.
Yeah.
So they kind of got their inspiration, and maybe they got some clones, I don't know, from what was happening in California, and started growing, their own CBD varieties, and it was from there that Charlotte Figi actually, they had a strain that Charlotte Figi was given, basically. So so Charlotte Figi, Dravet syndrome is a catastrophic form of epilepsy. It's intractable, so it doesn't respond generally to kind of standard anti-seizure drugs. So the children with Dravet, they have a very poor outcome, because these are huge seizures, grand mal seizures that they're having, and nothing controls them. So they're having hundreds of seizures, sometimes a day or a week, and actually, because they're having these seizures, actually then that affects their kind of intellectual development. They may be non-verbal. They might have to be peg fed. It's terrible, and an awful thing also for the family that having to look after these children. It's so frightening. So with Charlotte Figi, she had this almost kind of what seemingly a miraculous response to a CBD, dominant flower, which they turned into an oil. And I don't know if this is kind of cannabis legend now, but I believe it was called something. It was a strain that was called like Hippie's Disappointment.
Yeah, I'm familiar with that. Yeah.
Yeah, because you didn't get high from it. Who would want to kind of get some at the time, because if you were still smoking recreationally. So, but she had this tremendous, it reduced her seizures really quickly, I believe. And but the kind of turning point was the CNN documentary with Sanjay Gupta, which went global, and then suddenly the Stanley brothers, they had thousands, hundreds of thousands of patients and parents getting in touch and wanting to see if this would work for their family member or even for themselves. So and that's where CBD went global. I joined the industry in 2016. I guess in the UK a couple of years before that, or 2015, some kind of early adopters had started CBD companies, but these were small operations. It's like maybe, and I love that. I love that something is literally kind of grassroots. Someone has an experience or feels passionate about the plant, they set up their own little CBD company. There's a massive community around it, lots of words of mouth at the time, kind of SEO and digital marketing wasn't such a thing. So it was this fantastic movement, and okay, it wasn't regulated. Not always, you might not always get the exact precise amount of CBD, and that if it was tested, but generally people doing it with the right intentions. They were really wanting to help people because they knew the potential and the power of what CBD. But as I said before, what they were selling were really hemp extracts. So CBD is the main cannabinoid, the one that's most abundant in these products. But there's also other minor cannabinoids. It might have CBDA, it might have CBD, CBN, or whatever, THCA, and then also obviously the terpenes and the flavonoids, etc. And that's what people were happily taking back then. And there were no terrible side effects, or nothing terrible was happening. People generally found it quite helpful. So that's kind of quite different to where we are right now, obviously.
Yeah. Definitely, Mary. You kind of alluded to there the CBD situation with novel foods and stuff like that. I mean, what's your thoughts on the novel food situation and where CBD is now compared to where it was last year?
Yeah, again, this is, for me, referring back to the kind of my ayahuasca mentality. It's just like humans needing to kind of, put things in boxes and regulate and have bureaucracy and Like, I mean, you know, I think, you know, it's interesting that CBD is classified as a food, but it's classified as a food because it's not a narcotic. So it's kind of like by default, you know, it's like, okay, it's not a narcotic. Well, great, it's not a narcotic. That's brilliant for a start. But therefore it's a food. And so on the one hand, I'm like, okay, you know, historically, you know, when people were growing hemp and we were consuming hemp as part of our diets, we probably would have been consuming cannabinoids. I mean, this is something that, you know, that the European Industrial Hemp Association has tried to prove, unfortunately unsuccessfully. You know, they've got great evidence that, you know, hemp flowers were consumed in our food. You know, I think there's like Pope someone or other from, I don't know, the 15th century there's a recipe from his, you know, his recipe book, and there's some kind of there seemed to be a lot in Italy actually, that hemp flowers were used in food. And it kind of also makes me think about this idea, which I think we're completely out of touch with, is, you know, kind of let food be thy medicine. So like now we're in a time where you can't food is not a medicine. You know, we have this idea of what medicine is and what food is. So for me now, I think it's just this kind of ludicrous situation. Okay, we've said CBD is food, but because, you know, they've decided it's a novel food. So novel food meaning it wasn't consumed commonly before 1997. Then it's kind of entered this kind of regulatory. The conclusion is that only isolated CBD, most probably, I mean, I know that there's a slim glimmer that the whole plant extracts might make it through, but I somehow doubt that ultimately isolated CBD and synthetic CBD, which are going to be permitted in food. So somehow we're in this situation where it's better to have a synthetic chemical consumed as a food rather than something in its natural state. And it's like, again, it's like, we're nuts. Humans are nuts. It's like, what's the sense in that? You know, it's like, you just kind of regulate ourselves into this, you know, you end up in this little box of absurdity, basically. So, but the you know, the kind of the end result of this is that all these, you know, kind of little original CBD companies who, you know, the kind of one-man bands who, you know, had these good intentions, they can't afford, because, you know, the novel food is a very expensive process to go through, you know, and so actually, you know, it's going to be the big players that have come in, you know, in the last 2 years, since the whole kind of CBD green rush has started, and they, you know, they've got the resources to, you know, to pay for the process, and they don't really care about the plant. They don't care for me. Well, maybe there's some that do, but I feel it's not about CBD. It's not about hemp. It's not about health. It's about making money. And they don't, you know, so that really, really saddens me. But, you know, I think what will happen is there will be a grey/black market. You know, you can't, the kind of the stable door has you know, it's open now and the horse is bolted, and like it's like, you know, so so I think that's what will happen. And I think, you know, because that's the difficulty with CBD is this isn't like any other nutritional supplement. You know, like if you have arthritis, taking a vitamin C every day, that's not gonna, you know, that's not gonna get rid of your pain, is it? And it's, you know, and it's, there's nothing, as far as I know, like hemp extracts or CBD oils that genuinely, you know, patients are using them to manage symptoms. You know, there's nothing, as far as I know, that does that for a whole broad range of symptoms. So, you know, it is I think the problem is it's been trying to kind of shoehorn this into, you know, a kind of a little box that doesn't apply to a regulatory box that it doesn't, it doesn't fit in, basically.
It would certainly be a good idea to maybe perhaps include such, because they've got vitamins, they have minerals, and to just have cannabinoids as a completely separate category, and to make it so that they don't have all this red tape. Obviously it's unfortunate. It seems that we have no power over the situation. It's essentially stand back and watch how the industry forms. But one of the things, when I was read an article the other day, and the person in it had included that when they were describing what CBD is, and and they essentially just said that so CBD comes along and it activates receptors. And I thought to myself, this doesn't sound accurate, because I'm pretty certain that it doesn't actually do that. It comes along and it raises endogenous cannabinoids to a homeostatic level. So could you essentially clarify that, the relationship between cannabinoids and endocannabinoids and the receptors?
Yeah, that's something you often see that written, that CBD kind of binds with cannabinoid receptors. So so we have the endocannabinoid system, which is what they call a homeostatic regulator. So we have two classes, although I think what they're finding out now is actually far less simple than this. But in simple terms, you've got two classes of receptors: your CB1 receptors in your brain and central nervous system, and then your CB2 receptors, which are kind of in the immune system and peripheral nervous system, and in organs and in other places in the body. And we have sort of cannabis-like chemicals that are produced by the body called endocannabinoids, which bind with these receptors. And they're almost, it's actually, I always use this kind of analogy, which I've nicked from Martin from Project CBD, which it kind of describes that it's acting like a kind of dimmer switch. So the endocannabinoids are produced on demand, basically. So if there's some kind of usually excessive activity. So if we think of, I don't know, sort of more like sort of neurotransmitters, but it's not just neurotransmitters, but if there's too much I don't know, sort of dopamine or I think glutamate is the kind of the neurotransmitter that often we kind of produce. It's kind of an excitatory neurotransmitter that we can produce too much of. So the endocannabinoid systems are produced in response to that, to kind of bring things back into balance again. So it's all about maintaining balance or homeostasis in the body, and that's kind of our natural state. The natural state of health is homeostasis, and that's kind of what our body is always trying to get back into. So sort of it would be a kind of a nice neat story if CBD, which is a cannabinoid, a phytocannabinoid, just sort of bound with these receptors. THC does bind with these receptors, or partially bind with these receptors. So that's why, if you consume THC, it has this sort of, intoxicating effect, because it's binding with these receptors in our central nervous system and in our brain. But CBD works in a more kind of indirect way. So there's still kind of like theories around this, but a missing part of this, or actually of this kind of description of the endocannabinoid system, are the enzymes that break down the endocannabinoids in our body. So one of them has the acronym FAR. So it's fatty acid amide hydrolase. I'm going to get my little sample pattern.
High five.
I got like grade C GCSE in science. So come on, I'm doing all right. The endocannabinoids are produced on demand. They do their job, and then they get broken down in the body. So that's why it's actually quite difficult to kind of measure endocannabinoid levels, because they do their job and they get broken down. We know that CBD basically blocks or inhibits the production of FAR, the fatty acid amide hydrolase. So it's thought that because it blocks FAR, this allows basically the kind of anandamide, which is the kind of the bliss endocannabinoid, but also has a kind of anti-inflammatory and neuroprotectant and anti kind of cancer properties. Doesn't get broken down so quickly, basically. So it's sort of, so in a way, it's kind of like naturally boosting the endocannabinoid levels, but it's not boosting actually 2-AG, so it's just anandamide. I think there's other kind of ways in which CBD, I think it also helps to kind of transport anandamide to the nucleus of the cell or something like this, but my molecular biology doesn't kind of stretch to those levels. But actually, Project CBD has got some great information if you really want to get the nuts and bolts of how that works. But also, the thing with CBD, they call it what do they call it? Well, anyway, it's not just about the endocannabinoid system. So it's actually interacting with a whole host of other receptors in the body. Right. So we know it's kind of it's also interacting with serotonin, with the TRP receptors, and so it's which explains why it has the kind of mood boosting effect. Also has the kind of the analgesic effect. So it's targeting different receptors in the body at the same time, which is why it's such an interesting compound to study. Yeah. So
just when you mentioned the metabolic enzymes there, I thought the pat in the back was funny, Mary, because that's what I thought. I was like waiting for you to throw in the monoacylglycerol.
God!
Is it not right to say that monoacylglycerol essentially is the metabolic enzyme for 2-AG, which could essentially be reflective of also being a metabolic enzyme for CBD? Is that just because 2-AG is supposed to represent the molecular similarity of CBD, just as anandamide is supposed to be the molecularly similar to THC kind of thing? And
right.
I was thinking if
I haven't read that, to be honest. I haven't read that. So I mean, it's which doesn't necessarily mean it's not true. But it's not something that I know about.
I'll have to try and dig that out somewhere. Actually,
yes.
It's yeah. I like that. Yes, you will clarify this. That's really good. I like that. So yeah, I mean, obviously on the label, as everybody that's taking CBD knows, bioavailability is crucial. Could you describe why bioavailability is so important with CBD products?
Yeah, I mean, bioavailability relates to how much of what you ingest is actually used by the body, basically. And CBD has quite poor absorption rates in the body. So if we ingest CBD, so if we just kind of swallow some CBD, be it in a capsule, or even with your CBD oil, that's why you kind of you're advised to put it under your tongue, basically, because you've got kind of capillaries under the tongue, which means that it can get more directly into the bloodstream. But if you just swallowed it, and it goes through the kind of whole digestive process, it's broken down by enzymes, and by the time it actually gets into the bloodstream, the body is only really absorbing, I believe it's something like 6% of what you originally ingested. So the idea then, it's almost like, you want to kind of get, because CBD it's not cheap, and you kind of want to make sure you're getting kind of the best bang for your buck in a way. So there are different delivery methods. So when I'm talking about delivery methods, you've got, your kind of your tinctures and your oils, you've got your capsules, you can vape, you've got, kind of topical creams, that kind of stuff. So you want to choose like a delivery method that allows for the maximum possible absorption of the CBD into the body. So your body is getting to use the most amount of the CBD that you're paying for, basically. Mm-hmm. Kind of the one with the best bioavailability would be vaping, because it's essentially going straight into your bloodstream through your lungs. Next after that probably would be your drops or your tinctures, but it's really important that you kind of, you hold it, under your tongue. Well, you drop it under your tongue and you hold it there for a minute or 2 minutes or something like that. And then I guess, it kind of would be your, I mean, actually now I guess with things like, your gummies, if you are, sort of sucking on a gummy, let's say, and it's rather than just swallowing it down, that's going to be kind of being absorbed under the tongue as well. So, increasingly, as companies invest more money in kind of R&D, they're finding different ways that have better bioavailability. I mean, really, your kind of edibles that you're swallowing and your capsules, they should have the least bioavailability, but I've tried capsules at different times, and I've really got an effect from them. So I think ultimately, if you're a consumer, you have to kind of try things out and see what works for you, really. There was a study, I guess it's probably ongoing, but it's on babies, basically babies who've been deprived of oxygen during birth, and the kind of what if that happens, and I guess over I don't know how long it would have to be that then they've been deprived of oxygen. The standard treatment at the moment is actually it's like putting them into kind of a state of hypothermia, basically, and that sort of has a neuroprotective effect, and it kind of halts the production of glutamate and different kind of neurotransmitters that are trying to kind of protect the body, but actually end up having a kind of damaging effect, and there's like necrosis in the brain and all that kind of stuff. But there's really interesting work that's being done it started with a Spanish group, but I think it's actually being trialed in hospitals in the UK, when they're intravenously, alongside the hypothermia, but they're intravenously injecting CBD, purified CBD, into the brain, basically. Actually, it's into the brain. No, I think not into the brain. They're just injecting, it's intravenous CBD, basically, so not into the brain. Right. But it's just to show that would be like, if you're injecting something, that's the highest bioavailability. Yeah. But also, I think it's interesting because it's like, there's still this idea of, sort of using cannabinoids in babies and children and infants. There's still quite a lot of stigma about it. But, if you're going to be intravenously, and using CBD in newborns, that just shows how safe it is.
Yeah, it's exactly that. I mean, I've got friends that give CBD to their kids, and one of the things that I've noticed is that I think CBD would be really, and it's just obviously can't really be marketed to that direction or that demographic, but for teenagers, because as we mentioned, CBD, it causes homeostasis in the body, it balances chemicals, neurochemistry, and as we all know, the teenage years are the most turbulent for brain chemistry, so it would seem like a fitting application for that group, but obviously that's a long way away, I think, before they start marketing that element.
So I think the trouble with all this is that there's been it's a lot of the work that's been done is preclinical, and I think that's a key. Okay, there is kind of anecdotal experiences of patients that have benefited, and I think in all honesty, with anything to do with kind of neuroprotectants, okay, CBD is one thing, but you do need whole plant, you need THC as well. Yeah. But the work that's been done is preclinical, and it's not enough. It's not enough. You can't extrapolate. You can't extrapolate from studies and cell cultures or on animal models, because also as well, these are animal models of human diseases. Yeah. So it's not necessarily the same. And when you consider, I mean, I know this was something you wanted to kind of touch on, but getting a drug to market, like in general, we're not talking about cannabinoids now. Like it's a small percentage of drugs that make it from the preclinical stage to actually being an approved drug, sort of 5 years down the line, for a whole host of reasons, but one is, and I remember like interviewing Manuel Guzman, and he talks very honestly about how we, like, mice are obviously, it's stating the obvious, but they're completely different to humans. I mean, they're much more robust. I remember him saying that, this really robust immune system, and it's like, it's a really helpful tool. And helpful. I also hate it because I hate the thought of these little poor little animals, all this experimentation that's happening on them, which is another thing actually with CBD, which is my current kind of bugbear actually, because with CBD, talking about the nutritional supplements, the CBD extracts and oils, etc. Okay, it is, it's important that things are safe. It is a food, and now it's a novel food, so they're not sure of the safety. But because they have to provide toxicology data and stability data and all this kind of stuff, there are companies, well, there are some which I think, if you're going to do study this, or because So in order to, like, prove that CBD is safe, they, one way of doing it is administering it to mice over the kind of a period of time, like 6 months. So within that 6 months of that animal's life, you've kind of got the different phases of, from being a young adult to an adult to an aging or whatever, and then they kill the mouse. And then they, like, dissect its organs and do all this business to it, right? And okay, so some of the companies are kind of, they've got these consortiums, and they're just going to, there's going to be different companies that are going to be using that data. But there are other companies, and it makes me spit with rage. I saw, a story about, I can't remember which, I think it's an American one, but obviously they've got products because they're doing novel foods here in the UK. And they were, like, celebrating the fact that they've done 8 different types of animal studies on CBD, on rabbits, on different types of mice. I'm not sure if there are any dogs in there, horses, I think, and it's like, why are you glad about this? This is something that's completely unnecessary. But that's just a bit of a rant on my behalf. But
I fully agree with that, Mary. I fully agree.
In medical research, unfortunately, it is what it is, and it's a stage, it's a stage that has to be gone through in order to actually then go on to studies, like clinical studies in humans, etc. But they do try and minimize the suffering of the animals, etc. And there's all kind of ethics behind it. But I suppose the point that I'm making is that you can have these things that are are promising, but even I remember, like, sort of speaking to Manuel, and he was talking about this idea, cannabinoids are antioxidants, right? And which is, one of the reasons why, they could be, well, they are considered neuroprotectants. But actually, the whole kind of science behind antioxidants, there isn't that much evidence actually that because something is an antioxidant, that actually is going to have any massive benefit to our health, or has any kind of therapeutic in general, even outside of, so there's some things that kind of still sort of remain theories and have yet to be proven. But I think that's why it's interesting with this study that's happening on these children, these babies, newborns, that actually if it replicates the studies that they did on pigs, which is a bit gross, but on baby piglets who'd been just deprived of oxygen, it improved their outcome. I think it was like something by 90% or something like that, like a huge amount. So which shows, in this instance, when there has been this kind of brain insult caused by lack of oxygen, that it really did have a neuroprotective effect and did limit the damage that wouldn't ordinarily occur. So yeah, hopefully, it would be amazing, if CBD or cannabinoids in general do have this neuroprotective effect. I mean, I remember writing something about sort of CBD and cannabis for kind of anti-aging, sort of to look after our brains, really. And I remember, I can't remember the name of this American physician, but he kind of talked about, like, after the age of 40, 50, this idea of kind of microdosing. I think he said like 1 puff is enough or something, but just to, to have that kind of, that neuroprotectant effect. And it's interesting because it is, it kind of counters everything that we've been told about cannabis, right? That, that it's going to kill your brain cells, and it, causes schizophrenia and all sorts of terrible things. But this idea of just kind of microdosing, actually, it has a brain protective effect. But it would be fantastic for Alzheimer's if it can slow down, because I think that's what the idea is that with the kind of amyloid plaque, that it's going to slow down the progression of the disease. Because I think really that's kind of what is the most difficult thing to prove, because with the studies, I think there is some preliminary clinical studies happening, I think for Parkinson's at least, and I think there is some for Alzheimer's as well, but that's really for managing the symptoms, managing not even necessarily the kind of memory loss, but with Alzheimer's, there is a phase when there's an awful lot of agitation and anxiety and sleep disruption, all that kind of stuff. So I think the studies that are happening in humans at the moment to see if it can kind of manage those symptoms, which are terribly upsetting for the patient and everyone around them. Another kind of issue is whether it can slow down the actual progression, which would relate to that kind of neuroprotective, anti-inflammatory, I think it's a kind of triad of that neuroprotection, that the antioxidant and that kind of anti-inflammatory aspect is really important.
You know, I find quite interesting about this, Mary, as well is I wonder when that gap will be bridged when the on the ground first-hand subjective experience meets the clinical trials. So you've got all these people that would have first-hand experience of patients, parents that they would give cannabis to that have Alzheimer's or dementia condition, and they would see positive consequences of that, and then also they'd hear it through people. No, it doesn't, nice guidelines and authoritative bodies that proclaim that we know the best about cannabis, and they'll apply these rhetorics that has no evidence with people's first-hand experience. So that would be nice when that's eventually not a factor.
I guess also you have to think about in these modern times, in the last kind of 60 years, from whenever the kind of pharmaceutical model has become the main paradigm, how does a drug get developed? What's happening in those research labs? I mean, I'm sure occasionally they might get some inspiration from what's happening with real patients, but often, they're like, okay, I'm gonna cure cancer, and they're there kind of messing around with, I'm really simplifying things, I'm not a scientist, but they're doing all this work trying to, kind of create a new molecule that's going to be targeting receptors, and they kind of go at it in, from that direction, really, rather than actually, as I guess they did in the past, because as we know, there are so many drugs that have their basis from plants, basically. So that would have been going the old-fashioned way, is that they say, oh well, okay, there's I don't know, the birch bark or whatever, and people have been using that in folk medicine, and that appears to help with pain. Okay, well, let's research that, and we want to make some money, so we'll make a synthetic version, and we've got aspirin or whatever. But that's not the way things happen these days. It's it's kind of arse about face, really. But what I hope, sort of, again, back in the day, when you think of the kind of discovery of penicillin or whatever, it's surely, if I were a doctor, and I saw, a kind of patients coming into my surgery who were reporting, positive outcomes from something that they're doing, there is a tipping point when you go, oh, there's something in this, and it might just, don't know, it might start that process of something coming from real patient experiences. But I think there is this sort of a discussion that's happening, I believe at the moment, or something that NICE has said, that's not actually just related about cannabis medicines, is that they are considering real world data now, and not just your random controlled trials, basically. So because I think where cannabis is, or cannabis-based medicines, has fallen short is, one, there aren't a significant amount of clinical trials. I think mostly all of them that would be considered in the UK have been for Sativex, and they haven't been great results, in all honesty. And it's, Sativex is really expensive, so it's kind of understandable that NICE isn't, terribly enthusiastic about approving it for various conditions, apart from what it has done already.
One of the things as well, Mary, is that it's quite humorous when you think about this way, is that we have this scientific method which is all about isolating individual compounds, and then we have this plant which shows up, which is 500 plus compounds, and then you've got all these other individual compounds do something different. It's almost as if it showed up to just destroy the clinical trial process. Almost as if think you did an isolated molecule, well, watch this, Well,
there's a team of scientists that I really love the work that they do. They're at the Complutense University in Madrid. So that's Manuel Guzman, I've mentioned before, and Cristina Sanchez and Guillermo Velasco. And what I really like about them, because the thing is, scientists, they're always going to be, to a degree reductionist, because, they have to work out. So Christina Sanchez, she's an eminent molecular biologist who's done some amazing research into the anti-tumoral properties of cancer. And she did this great talk when she just kind of said, the first step that we have to do with anything, but particularly with cannabis is they have to work out what are the active molecules, what are the individual ones doing, just so they kind of, that's kind of scientific process. Yeah. But what I like about their team is that they do still see, because they're very much in touch with what's happening with patients. They're part of something called the Spanish Medical Cannabis Observatory, and they're not just sort of sitting there in their labs just developing drugs for pharmaceutical companies. They want patients to have access for the best form of cannabis that's helpful for them. Mm. So they did a study basically when they were comparing a cannabis botanical extract that was predominantly THC, was the kind of, but it was more, THC than CBD, but it had, other cannabinoids. I think it was from Aunt's Elders in the US. It was one of their extracts that they used. And they compared that in breast cancer cell lines, and I think also in animal models. They compared it with THC, purified THC, basically, just to see what was the difference in terms of the anti-tumoral action. Mm. And, they saw that the full plant extract had a superior anti-tumoral action compared to the isolated THC. And then what I thought was interesting was that they then tried to say, okay, well, what is it? If we added like we mimic the same kind of cocktail of terpenes that are in this whole plant extract, and added that to the purified THC, would that improve the anti-tumor? Would it make it equally as effective as the whole plant extract? Yeah. And it didn't, basically. So it still left lots of questions, but what they realized was it wasn't just THC plus the terpenes that are in that whole plant extract. And they thought, I think they, it might have been THCA, or I don't know. So but I thought it was interesting, having spoken to them, they, for them, it's not just about the single compounds, they believe in the cannabis plant, but it still has to be based on science. Yeah. So it's not a kind of either or, and I love that, basically.
I like the fact that also confirms the entourage influence with the rest of the collective cannabinoids, because very often you find it in the community some people don't believe it's a thing. This is speculation, because, and again, it probably comes into play that there's not enough evidence for some people to be convinced that that's the case.
Yeah, I mean, to be honest, I remember writing something and I was sort of questioning it a little bit, just because I think it's often used in marketing, really. It's just on one other kind of like, oh, we can't say very much about our products in terms of, they're good for pain or they're good. So we're just going to like talk about the entourage effect. And there is a kind of romanticism about it. I mean, it's a lovely story, but I do think, I do also think there's some validity in it as well, because, it's like, you can apply the entourage effect to food. Should we just like, I don't know, take a bunch of synthetic like vitamins and then eat crap? No, we'll like, eat some fruit, right, and get everything, because it's, it's a vitamin C, but it's, it's all the other stuff that's in it as well. So yeah, I mean, for me, it kind of it just makes sense, really. I mean, personally, I don't know. I've tried kind of CBD isolate products. I don't find they do much for me personally, but then also I'm not someone who has, something that I, necessarily respond in an amazing way to whole plant CBD products either. So, but, I know plenty of people who do, use whole plant and have tried isolate, just haven't got the same effect. So,
yeah. Yeah, you mentioned earlier that obviously you've done a lot of work with Project CBD. What's the thing you say is most noticeable between the US and over here, just when it comes to CBD?
Well, I guess in the US, they're not reliant on CBD products being extracted from hemp, basically. So you could you know, if you're in California or I mean, anywhere where either there's kind of medicinal use that's legal or you know, adult use or what have you, you can just go to a dispensary and you'll get a CBD dominant product, but it will be, you know, contain THC that's over the 0.2% or 3%. I think it's 3% in the United States. So then you're going to have a different kind of profile of minor cannabinoids and terpenes and all the rest of it. I think, you know, speaking to Martin, you know, they're always a little bit kind of dubious about the hemp extracted CBD products, just because, you know, and again, I'm kind of no expert on this, but you know, the buds and the flowers, if you're just breeding kind of hemp, you get a superior bud and a flower, according to Martin, if it's something that's going to have a slightly higher level of THC in it, basically. Right. So but yeah, so that's kind of one difference. I mean, I'm like longing, I've never, since being in this world, I've only been to the US once, and that was, I don't know, 20 years ago to New York, but I'm dying to go to the US and just like, you know, I'm not a massive recreational user because I like really high kind of THC weed. I feel a bit paranoid, but I want to go to like a dispensary and have all that kind of that plethora of varieties and just, you know, be able to choose, basically. That's what I'm longing for. So I'm hoping to do a little road trip when things get back to normal and have all these people properly introduce me to what is possible, basically, when you have a legal market.
Yeah, no, that sounds good. I'm kind of looking forward to something like that myself as well. Interestingly, just when you're talking about recreational there, over the years, I kind of feel myself getting a bit old now, because I find myself with like cannabis strains that's really high in THC and like really low in CBD. I find myself feeling like that. You're essentially on the edge for 15 minutes before you get to enjoy the come down, which levels out nicely. And there's been a few times where I've went and I've smoked and I've had to go and get the CBD and just literally have a little bit of CBD to kind of level me out a bit. So yeah.
But you know what? That's happened to me with CBD products. You know.
Yeah.
It's like so yeah. I mean, I don't know if I'm like super sensitive, but yeah, if I and it is with whole plant ones. Yeah, if I have too much, I mean, I remember it was funny. One time actually, when I was still working for Endoca, and I had maybe like 4 drops of a 15% oil, which is that's not super high, right? That's, you know, I don't know how much that, maybe that's like 20 milligrams seemingly of CBD. And when, you know, the fact that everyone's like, oh, CBD, there's no intoxicating effect, and you know, I had to go and lie down under a tree. I was having a meeting with this new marketing boss or whatever, and I started to sort of feel like my face start to go like lose sensation, like get really tight, and I was like, and it was, so that wasn't enjoyable, and so. And yeah, that's happened to me a couple of times. If you're not expecting it, you know, if you're sort of there thinking, oh, I want to be chilled, and then you're like, I can't feel my face. It's like, and you're in Sainsbury's. It's like, it's not good.
Just before we get going, Mary, you obviously do the Cannabis Voices podcast. What is it? What do you feel you see most consistent between all your guests, apart from the fact that it's all cannabis based? Do you see any similarity between everybody that's obviously connected with the cannabis industry?
Kind of passion and dedication, really. I mean, people are coming at it from different angles. You know, I've sort of interviewed some scientists who are, you know, the kind of single molecule, you know, not proponents of entourage effect or anything like that. But there's still a passion and dedication and a belief that this, you know, that this, whatever aspect that they're involved with, has a lot of importance for human well-being and health. So yeah, I mean, it's that really, a sense of kind of, you know, having to fight this injustice, this situation where something that could be of so much benefit, you know, if given chance, we just need to kind of loosen up a bit, but just find a way. I mean, I think it's hard with cannabis. I mean, because it's like, on the one hand, I think if we're in this world, we're wanting like a kind of some new system to be created that cannabis-based medicines, or whatever you want, you know, whatever aspect can sit within. And I think at the moment there isn't the will from the regulators to do that, essentially. Yeah. But anyway, that's just kind of an aside. Yeah, I don't know. It's just a kind of a passion and a commitment and wanting to create change, really, being an absolute determined to create change.
What do you see as the most exciting thing personally? Just obviously, I mean, I'm assuming you love being interactive with the cannabis industry and writing about cannabis. I mean, is this what you thought it'd be?
Do you know what? I find it, I mean, the writing aspect, because I've been doing it now for 6 years. I'm enjoying I enjoy the podcast more than anything at the moment. So, you know, it's like, particularly because touching back to me, you know, not being a scientist and scraping through my GCSEs in integrated science, you know, I'm sometimes it takes I've ended up being a science writer. Basically, that's what I do for Project CBD mostly. And sometimes like, so you know, it takes increasingly more brain energy for me to summon up, you know, the energy to kind of to write something if it's kind of quite, because I wrote something about autism recently, and you know, it's because it's Project CBD, it's not just some sort of, I don't gloss over stuff and you know, just kind of, I you know, speak to the scientists and I really sort of try and understand everything, and that takes that. I mean, I think, you know, that's kind of something that you enjoy as well, right? You're really kind of trying to understand the mechanisms behind it, and and so that takes a lot of energy, and sometimes I've got the mental energy, sometimes I haven't. So which is why, you know, I'm increasingly, you know, enjoying doing the podcasting. And also, you know, it's like I've been doing a little bit of kind of consultancy for kind of CBD companies as well, because, you know, when you've been doing this for a while, you kind of glean a lot of information. And I do, you know, I do think that it is important that CBD companies are ethical and responsible in, you know, how they market their products, because, you know, I think it is wrong to actually market a product and say, you know, present it as a medicine that is, you know, going to cure someone's anxiety or whatever. I think that is wrong. And so so, you know, I've sort of gone from being poacher to gamekeeper in a way about that. But I think there's a lot of vulnerable people. It's the same with this as it is with, you know, anything in complementary therapies, alternative therapies, all this kind of world. There's, you know, I think where there are vulnerable sick people who, you know, are desperate for solutions, I think you have to, you know, behave ethically and responsibly. You know, if you're selling a product that you say is going to, you know, help their malaise or illness. So but in terms of, I don't know, in terms of sort of excitement, I feel like again, a sort of something that I'm interested in at the moment, which, not that I have never sort of, you know, not been interested in it, but it's like, particularly with hemp, like CBD is just like one small part of what it has to offer humanity, you know, and this planet. So that's something that I'm feeling quite passionate about, and I feel like, and I've just, you know, I've joined this kind of party a little bit late maybe, but I feel and I hope that things are about to change in the UK. So, for example, that you know, British hemp farmers, or that there will be a British hemp industry. It's very small at the moment because there are so many barriers to entry. Farmers have to destroy the buds and flowers because of, you know, this outdated Misuse of Drugs Act, which is applied to hemp. And so, you know, there are so many amazing uses that you know, that hemp has, you know, as an alternative to plastics. And, you know, it's carbon sequestration. It's endless, absolutely endless. So, you know, I'm very passionate about extending and broadening the public knowledge, because I think they kind of, not everybody, but we sort of know now, okay, associate CBD, that comes from hemp, but it's much, much more than that. So that's something that I want to kind of continue championing.
Well, we've essentially covered everything I was wanting to talk about, Mary. You got anything else you'd like to add before we get going?
Not really. I'll do a little plug for the book. I don't know if I've done
Go
the
for it.
CBD book.
I'll leave the description for that in the bottom. What was your method? I was going to ask you about that. Funnily enough, actually, because when I clicked on your podcast and you did one where you were actually doing that and you were advertising your book, and you had me laughing. I was laughing because you started off and you go, "Oh yeah, normally I'd be talking to somebody else, but I'm going to talk about it. I'm actually going to advertise my book." And you go, "I've not actually advertised my own book on my own podcast," which is absurd.
It's true, actually. Right, yeah, it took me ages to do it. I felt a bit embarrassed. I don't know. It's like all doing things like Instagram Live and all that kind of stuff. There's loads of things I haven't done, and I know I should do. The method, to be honest, it was kind of, as books go. I mean, it's the first one, my one and only book, really. But I found it really easy to write because I suppose a fair amount of it I've written before, and different articles and stuff like that. But I just really, I suppose one of the things, Connor, that I do with my writing is I try and simplify things, really. So while it's not like I haven't dumbed stuff down, I think I hope there's still I don't know people who are very experienced in the industry and found it a useful and helpful book. Yeah. But I just I've always been, whatever I've done in my careers, I've been like a kind of bridge from I don't know, sort of tricky information and then sort of translating it into something that everybody can understand and enjoy. So that's kind of what I wanted to do. I really just wanted it to be that there's so much. If you wanted to try a CBD product and you had no idea, you've never tried it before, you don't know anything about cannabis, it's really hard. It's like, where'd you start? It's like you Google CBD and like, I don't know, thousands of companies come up all saying that they sell the best CBD in the world and all the rest of it, and there's all these products. So I just wanted to write something that someone could just read from start to finish, and by the time they get to the end, they know they have all the tools they need to end up with a decent product that's that's going to give them the best chance of benefiting from what CBD and hemp has to offer. So that was kind of my main objective. And then also just countering, because as in the spirit of responsibility, just countering all these kind of stories that are like I think give potentially false hope, maybe, that this is the panacea and this is going to cure whatever it is. So that's why the section on research, I think there's maybe one caveat that didn't have any kind of studies that are currently happening on humans, but it wasn't, for me, to include something, it wasn't enough for there to be a preclinical study. It has to be something that's translated into humans as well. And also I found, for me, it was really important just to kind of to explain, that when we see those stories of, cannabis compound cures cancer, to what does that mean actually, just so people then have a lens through which to look through when they're sort of deciphering what that information means. And then, in the podcast that you listen to, I'd done a kind of little kind of put together some of the interviews that I did. So there's some case studies, obviously there's so many case studies of people who've had amazing, life-changing experiences and benefits through CBD. So just a kind of collection of people that I spoke to, just sharing their stories, really. And so that was it. I mean, I don't know if that equals a method, but that's kind of, that's the nature of the book, and it's had really, really good feedback, and people have exactly done that. They're like, I don't know, I want to try some CBD, I don't know where to start. They bought the book, and then they, they felt empowered. That's what it, it really is about, empowering people just to take those first steps.
Yeah, no, I've seen it on Amazon. It's all 5 stars, Mary, so it's a high five to your writing. No, definitely. Yeah. But yeah, so I'd recommend to all the viewers, go out and buy one. The descriptions and the links in the description box below. And thanks very much for chatting with me, Mary. I've thoroughly enjoyed this.
Oh, you're welcome. Thank you. Have a great day.
Thanks to Mary for giving me her time, and thanks to you for sticking around until the end of the video. I sincerely hope you enjoyed the content. I'll see you next time.